That they could orchestrate such a show of force in response to the murder of 4 Jews in Paris would be amazing enough. But that's not what it is. It's, in fact, actually orchestrated in defense of Israelis who bombed and murdered thousands of non-Jews in Gaza over the summer. So take in what's going on here. The Israeli military bombs Gaza, and months later, Jews worldwide join with those Israelis to organize a UN meeting to literally shift the blame to, quote, anti-Semitism worldwide, unquote. That's what I took away from that first article. The second article I saw sourced and discussed in many places. It's originally from the AP. In fact, one of the odd things about this article is that the only references I could find to the quotes that were being made in the article was the AP itself, as if the AP was the original source. I expected to find, since it's a story about a statement from the UN, I expected but could not find an official web page hosted by the UN with the statement. But what the AP article had to say was repeated in many other sources, as AP articles usually are. This one, which was directly on the ap.org site, starts, 40 mainly Western countries issued a joint statement after this UN meeting, urging all nations to, quote, declare their categorical rejection of anti-Semitism, unquote, strengthen laws to combat discrimination, and prosecute those responsible for anti-Semitic crimes. Quote, the determination to eradicate the conditions that give rise to the Holocaust was a guiding principle among the founders of this organization over 6 decades ago, unquote, their statement said. Quote, let us rededicate ourselves to that principle and endeavor to eliminate anti-Semitism in all its forms, unquote. I searched specifically for that phrase, declare their categorical rejection of anti-Semitism. And as I said, all I could find was the AP story itself with that quote. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But I want to note, in response to this, the unequivocal, uncompromising language in trying to compel others to serve the Jews, to declare their categorical rejection of anti-Semitism and to eliminate anti-Semitism in all forms. The article continues, in the keynote speech, French philosopher Bernard-Henri Lévy said blaming Jews is, quote, once again becoming the rallying cry of a new order of assassins, unquote. Lévy, who is Jewish, called for new arguments to counter anti-Semites who say, quote, Jews are detestable, unquote. These anti-Semites call Israel an, quote, illegitimate state, unquote, deny the Holocaust, and believe Jews give far too much attention to Holocaust victims and stifle other people's martyrs, including the Palestinians, he said. Dozens of speakers echoed his call to address the root causes of anti-Semitism, as well as wider religious intolerance, hatred, and extremism. So I think this lays it out pretty clearly that it's the Jews trying to dictate what others are permitted to say, not only what to say, but what to be detested about. It's detestable. And the Jews are detestable for doing this. Lévy offers no arguments, and his call for arguments is disingenuous anyway. The whole point of the UN meeting was for Jews to make public their demands, not to argue, and it amounts to telling everyone else that they must reject, prosecute, eliminate blasphemy against the Jews. Lévy is one of the many Jews who unambiguously connects Jews to Israel and to their Holocaust narrative. Near the end of the article, it says, France's Minister of State for Europe, Harlem Desire, urged the world to act, quote, with the utmost firmness wherever anti-Semitism rears its head in the world, unquote. Quote, without the Jews of Europe, Europe would no longer be Europe, unquote, he warned. Harlem Desire, which is his real name, is a Semitic-looking mulatto. The premise of Desire's argument is that the world, and especially European governments, should be more worried about what's best for the Jews than what's best for Europeans. The world, and especially European governments, should see a Europe without Jews as unthinkable, but literally not think at all about what Europe would be like without Europeans. A host can survive without a parasite. A parasite cannot survive without a host. Jews, without the wealth and security that they've wheedled out of Europeans, would cease to exist. That's their fear. That's why they equate expulsion with extermination. Europe, without the parasitic load of the Jews, would thrive, as Spain did after expelling its Jews in 1492, and as Germany did as well in 1933 and in the short years before the war. Desire called for a new legal framework at the European Union and internationally to address the diffusion of racist and anti-Semitic speeches and material. This is needed today, Desire said, to, quote, put the responsibility on those passing the message, unquote, such as Google and Twitter. This is the closest thing to a new argument that was offered, though it's really just the same old methods applied to new technology, new forms of communication that they want to restrict. The tactic suggested here is to leverage the influence and power that the Jews already have over some governments in some places and couple it with the influence that they have over certain internet corporations in order to impose the priorities and interests of Jews over and above everyone else, everywhere else, all at once. They're tired of dealing with individual countries, individual governments, individual corporations. And that's why they're going to the international level to make this push now. The final article I'll discuss, and I might have to cut it a little bit short here, it's really just more of the same, but it really makes it explicit that it's the Jews that are behind this outside of the UN even. It's an article from The Guardian titled, Jewish Leaders Call for Europe-Wide Legislation Outlawing Anti-Semitism. It starts, the European Jewish leaders, backed by a host of former EU heads of state and government, are to call for pan-European legislation outlawing anti-Semitism amid a sense of siege and emergency, feeding talk of a mass exodus of Europe's oldest ethnic minority. Let's decode this phrase that they used, Europe's oldest ethnic minority. Ethnic is a euphemism for race. An ethnic group is a genetically and culturally, in other words, racially, distinctive group. The oldest ethnic groups in Europe are Europeans, not Jews. Jewish roots, genetically and culturally, are in the Levant, not in Europe. On the border of Europe, outside its boundaries. The Jews have quite consciously preserved their distinctiveness from Europeans for more than 2 millennia while living amongst Europeans. The words minority and exodus allude to the Jews' victim narrative. And the use of the word exodus in particular is a reminder that it stretches back to Egypt, far more than 70 years ago and outside of Europe. The fact is that the Jews, whomever the host among whom they live happens to be at any point in time, see themselves, organize, and operate as a collective. This international lobbying, using their influence over some governments to influence other governments to, quote, combat anti-Semitism, unquote, is a perfect example of this. The fact is that the Jews have collectively imposed themselves upon virtually every European nation at one time or another. They have infiltrated, manipulated, and exploited Europeans, moving about and concentrating physically in each and every place that Europeans have ever been or have ever gone. Today, they're manipulating Europeans collectively via the EU. Europe's oldest ethnic minority? No. The Jews are the oldest and most hostile alien interlopers in Europe. The Jews have parasitized Europeans who have for millennia now served as their primary hosts. This is another fact that most Europeans don't want to face. The article continues, a panel of 4 prestigious international experts on constitutional law, backed by the European Council of Tolerance and Reconciliation, have spent 3 years, so this wasn't an instant thing, this has been a long time grinding away, 3 years consulting widely and drafting a 12-page document on, quote, tolerance, unquote. They are lobbying to have it converted into law in the 28 countries of the EU. The proposal would outlaw anti-Semitism as well as criminalizing a host of other activities deemed to be violating fundamental rights on specious, religious, cultural, ethnic, and gender grounds. So this is essentially an echo of the demands the Jews put forth at the UN, but it's aimed more specifically at the EU, and it's been going on for even longer than the October timeframe when the UN meeting was scheduled. But it also indicates the long-term premeditated nature of the effort, and it comes with these fleshed out, ready-made answers to the demands that the Jews made at the UN and here. The article continues, these steps would include banning the burqa, or these things that would be banned. It's not clear really what the article was saying about this, but these would include banning the burqa, female genital mutilation, forced marriage, polygamy, denial of the Holocaust and genocide generally, criminalizing xenophobia, and creating a new crime of, quote, group libel, unquote, public defamation of ethnic, cultural, or religious groups. Women's and gays' rights would also be covered. This is the traditional grab bag approach that Jews have taken. Their victim narrative generalized and extended to other groups outside themselves, disguising their concern for their own interests by wrapping them up and conflating them with the interests of others. It's not clear from this that whether they want to ban burqas or ban the banning of burqas. I don't really care, because whatever it is, it's subject to change depending upon what the Jews who run the show demand at some future point. The article has a little bit more that I could comment on, but I think I've made my point. They talk about tolerance and the freedom of expression, but it's really as defined by the Jews and the interests and security of the Jews. That's what this is all about. And it's also another reminder, amidst all the disposable universalist platitudes, that it is the Holocaust narrative, the Jews as victims of Europeans narrative, that the Jews themselves provide as justification for the contempt and hostility that they so constantly and freely express toward Europeans.